Yeah, this is very nice. This is very, it's very sweet. It's very gentle. It's very non-threatening.
Yeah. It's not like when you were meditating.
Yeah, I know. Because see, I'm not an enlightened being yet, so whenever a loud noise happens, I go like this. Enlightened beings, that's one of the ways that you can tell your friends and neighbors are enlightened. You know, when this really loud noise happens, they're just completely peaceful. I'm not joking because I'm not joking really because the startle reflex is associated with the subtle sense of self. Those of you who've studied with Trungpa Rinpoche know his emphasis on the model of the 8 consciousnesses. We meditate with the 6th consciousness, which is the sense of all of the mental consciousness. We meditate with the mental consciousness, number 6. The first 5 are related to the senses. The 6th is thought. The 7th is this subtle sense of I or self, and the 8th is called the base consciousness. When the 8th consciousness is unrecognized, it manifests as confusion and mundane consciousness. And when we recognize the nature, then it's the basis of wisdom. Anyway, I have a story to tell about this a little later. Otherwise, I'll get off topic again. I kind of wander around sometimes. As you know, we're on the 3rd point of the 7 points of mind training. And there are 3 methods to work with adverse conditions. The first is relative bodhichita, and the second is ultimate bodhichita. And the ultimate bodhichita, there's only one slogan. And it's a little complicated to explain. The slogan literally says, to see confusion as the 4 bodies of the Buddha, the protection of emptiness is insurpassable. Now, if we discard or set aside, if we set aside for a moment the first part, the second part is easy to understand. Remember I talked about the 2 truths. The truth of how things appear and the truth of how things really are. Through the great practices of the Tibetan lineages, such as Dzogchen and Mahamudra, one can realize these 2 truths. These 2 practices use different names and different methods, but they reach the same goal. But what do we do until then? It says the protection of emptiness is insurpassable. Here's what Jamgon Kongtrul says. All appearances, and particularly adverse conditions, are like the distress you experience when you dream of being burned in a fire or swept away by a flood. In other words, when adverse things happen to us, we believe they're real. But the teachings of the Buddha say that there is no solidity and ultimate reality to anything. The way Jamgon Kongtrul says is the appearances of mind are given a reality that they do not have. We give them a reality they do not have. I like to use an example with an imaginary bird. This is a parakeet. Many of you may have had parakeets as pets. To entertain them, you would put a mirror in their cage. The parakeet would play with the imaginary bird inside the glass. But some parakeets might actually think there really is a bird inside there. In our example, our parakeet is unenlightened. It looks at the glass and it sees another bird. Right behind the glass, there's another bird. And if the parakeet is a happy parakeet, it will cuddle. And if it's an angry parakeet, it will attack the bird that's inside the cage, inside the glass. Or it could just be indifferent. Okay, so this example is what happens. This is us. This is our mind. We have a thought, or we have an emotion or an experience. And when we become aware of it, we think that it is other than the mind that's having it. A thought has arisen. Quick, call the newspapers. Something exciting is happening. We perceive that what has arisen, the thought, the emotion, the idea, is somehow permanent and real and other than us. And so if it's a happy thought, we rejoice. If it's an unhappy thought, we get depressed. Or we could actually become utterly indifferent. But this is the example of how our mind malfunctions, how our mind misunderstands its appearances as being real. If we stare at the glass long enough, it will disappear. The idea of meditation then is to recognize that the thoughts that arise in the mind and the mind that's having them are not two. And by doing this, we become completely free from suffering. Not just having the intellectual understanding, but the actual experience is realization. And this takes practice. But at least the example of the parakeet in the mirror explains to us why we're so confused. So when we are able to rest in a state in which things arise, but we don't cling to them, we see that they appear. We know that they are empty in nature. We know that the appearance and the empty nature arise simultaneously. And we know that they are inseparable. Okay, so they appear with clarity. They're empty in nature. These two arise simultaneously. And they can't be broken apart. They're inseparable. You can't take a hammer and chisel it apart. Do you remember the first part of the slogan that talked about the four bodies of the Buddha? This is the way that Jamgon Kongtrul explains it. It appears with clarity. Our thoughts and experiences appear with clarity, is what I mean. They're empty in nature. These two arise simultaneously, and they are inseparable. Okay, so the clear appearance is called Nirmanakaya, or the form body of the Buddha. The empty in nature is called the Dharmakaya, or the body of enlightenment. And then the fact that they appear together simultaneously is called the Sambhogakaya aspect. And then the long word, Svabhavivikaya, I can't spell it, is that they are inseparable. So that these are the four philosophies. They talk in philosophy about the four ways that a Buddha manifests. Basically, we don't need to worry about the names. What we need to think about is that there are four ways in which a Buddha manifests. And that really, if we let go of clinging to thoughts, everything can manifest as Buddha. So if we rest in meditation in this way and don't cling to anything that arises, things don't stop arising. But we rest with them. And we can see them clearly. They don't disappear, but there's no grasping toward them. So this is a way of pointing out the nature of all things. Jamgon Kongtrul calls it wearing the armor of the proper view. And this way, our mind is protected from confusion and suffering. That's how we use ultimate bodhichita when there are adverse circumstances. We look at adverse circumstances as being a function of our mind's confusion, like the parakeet in the mirror. So anyway, this is a way of thinking about the view. If we can see negative things happening to us as being dreamlike, that's amazing. The great teacher Khenpo Tsultrim Jamso tells people they should go to amusement parks. And they should go on all the wild rides. And they can watch their minds in the midst of fear while being in situations of what amounts to imaginary fear. I can't do that because amusement rides make me sick. But from time to time, I see and imagine situations and try to see their dreamlike nature. So that's a little bit about how ultimate bodhicitta helps us to overcome adverse circumstances. Now you can see why love and compassion are so much easier. It's much easier to practice love and compassion than to attempt to hold this view. But we can still wander through our day to day thinking, gosh, this is all just like my experience in a dream. And that will be of some benefit. Then finally, the third method for working with adverse circumstances consists of special practices. These are accumulating merit, which we can do by reciting mantras and circumambulating and making offerings. And we can even do it through prayer. Jamgon Kongtrul says the best way to pray is to pray without hope and fear. I have to say, I don't like the way they use the word hope here. Because after all, you can have hope for enlightenment. Even Taisita Rinpoche agrees with this. He says it's really about expectation. When we pray and expect to get what we're praying for, that's painful. So we're trying to pray without expectation of a specific result. In fact, Jamgon Khantrul quotes a prayer in here. He says, if it's better for me to be ill, I pray for the blessing of illness. If it's better for me to recover, I pray for the blessing of recovery. So that's the idea of how to pray. So the second of the 4 special practices are confessing and purifying negative actions. I know some people thought, well, wait a minute, I thought I left confession behind. But we have it in Buddhism too. In fact, there are 4 parts to it. They call them the 4 powers. The first power is the power of reliance. We rely on the Buddha, so we think that the Buddha is present in front of us. After all, the Buddha has left samsara, so he understands what we've been through. So the second power is the power of regret. We regret our negative actions. This reverses our tendency to repeat them. The third power is the power of remedy. The fact that we're confessing is the remedy itself. And the final one is resolution. We resolve not to repeat the negative action. And then this allows us to let go of the badness of our negative actions. And then the last 2 of the special practices are making offerings. And so these are special practices we can do in order to work with negative things that happen. The final slogan in this section of transformation is a long one. It goes like this. It says, in order to take unexpected conditions as your path, immediately join whatever you meet with meditation. This means that we don't need to waste anything that happens in our life. In other words, we don't have a mindless life. We're not on automatic pilot. We're not mindlessly walking through our life. If we experience happiness, we imagine sharing it with all beings. And if we're unhappy, we imagine that we're removing the suffering from all sentient beings. And in summary, Jamgon Khantrul says, maintain the motivation to help others, whatever you are doing, eating, sleeping, walking, sitting. As soon as you encounter any situation, just work at mind training. And I think this is why Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said, you don't need anything other than this. It's a complete path all by itself. And it all involves developing love and compassion. If we have love and compassion for ourselves, we'll take good care of ourselves. And if we have love and compassion for others, we will always be kind to them. This doesn't mean that we will allow people to abuse us, because that's wrong-headed compassion. This is allowing them to accumulate more negativity. So we don't need to allow that to happen. The remaining 4 of the 7 points of mind training are expansions of these 3 topics. The 4th point tells you how to practice and expand mind training to your whole life. It also tells you how to practice mind training at the time of death. It tells you how to face your death with a sense of practice and spirituality. The 5th point of mind training is how you measure whether your practice is going well or not. I'm actually going to mention one of the slogans here. It's the first one. All Dharma has one purpose. And I'm just going to read what Jamgon Khantrul says. It's very short. The purpose of all Dharma is to tame ego clinging. So as you practice Dharma, your ego clinging should decrease. If your efforts in Dharma are not counteracting ego clinging, your practice is meaningless. So he says this is the one criteria by which a Dharma person can be measured. It's called he calls it the yardstick by which a Dharma person, it's the ruler, the yardstick, that by which a Dharma person is measured, is whether their ego clinging is up or down. Personally, I find that my number one criteria to see whether I'm going well or not is how much mental pain I experience. If I'm inflated by praise and deflated by blame, I'm not doing very well. So that I just keep working at Tonglen. So that's a little bit about the fifth point. The sixth and the seventh are commitments and guidelines. It prevents your Dharma practice from declining. It tells you not to use mind training to become a sorcerer, thinking that you can defeat all enemies by mind training, then you show off. And then it gives you a series of short slogans to show you whether you're making a mistake or not, such as, don't be excited by cutting remarks. I used to be a newspaper reporter, and I would get really excited when politicians would make a mistake and be involved in a scandal. So I think I accumulated a lot of negative karma. So it's telling us that if we're still excited by these things, we still have some way to go to work on our ego cleaning. It also advises us to take up the things we really need for practice, such as the three primary resources. One is a good guru. Another is the proper practice of Dharma with a workable mind. And the third is the suitable conditions for Dharma practice, such as food, clothing, and so on. It also advises us to practice the three difficult points. And that is recognizing our disturbing emotions, overcoming them, and then cutting their continuity. So my advice to you is to find a way to study these. There are several books I see that are available in Portuguese to study, and to study these slogans. But even if you can't study the words, practice Tonglen, and practice the three objects, three poisons, three seeds of virtue slogan with your own mental afflictions. And that will be a way to practice what is really the heart of the 7-point mind training. So I think there's a few minutes left, and if anybody else has comment or question, this would be a good time. Yeah, that was thank you, because that was a lot of information. I think I made everybody tired. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think maybe this concept is a little complicated. Okay, so we'll start by saying it is complicated. So I'm not surprised. In fact, I have to tell you, I was confused by this until maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So what helped me the most was to start by thinking about two. There's a prayer that says, the Buddhas, through compassion, arise in two ways. One for beings with pure karma, and one for beings whose karma is not pure. The pure karma beings are the ones who are already partially awakened bodhisattvas. And those of impure karma are the rest of us who aren't enlightened yet. So the prayer says, the enlightened mind of the Buddha, through compassion, arises as the two form kayas, or the two form bodies. So through their compassion, they arise in ways that can be seen by the beings of pure and impure karma. The enlightened mind of the Buddha is sometimes called the Dharmakaya, or the body of absolute truth. It's not really a body. It's an aspect of the Buddha. The enlightened mind of the Buddha can then be, through its compassion, manifests two types of appearance for beings of pure karma and impure karma. The first of these is the Nirmana Kaya, which is called the form Kaya. And really the best example of this is Shakyamuni. He was a Buddha that could be seen by everybody. He had enlightened mind, and yet he had a body like humans. But his mind was never separate from the Dharmakaya. So that's a form body that all of us can see, even those with impure karma. The Buddha, however, is no longer with us. So now what we have are created Nirmanakaya. The statues and the paintings. But they're not really just statues and not really just painting. Because the ones in this shrine room, for example, have been consecrated and blessed. And the Buddhas have been asked to remain with them. So that's an example of created Nirmanakaya. Then the other one is Sambhogakaya. And sometimes that's called the body of communication, or the body of complete enjoyment. It's called this because in paintings and in statues, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are wearing crowns and jewels and silks. It's not that they're walking around with bangles on. These garments and jewelry are symbolic of the qualities and the majesty of enlightenment. Because when a Buddha, when a bodhisattva who is already partially awakened sees another enlightened being, they are magnificent. Because the beings of pure karma have fewer obstacles, they can see more of the majesty of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. But we're not there yet. However, we can get an idea of the meaning by seeing the magnificent forms of the created Nirmanakaya with the jewels and silks. When we see them, our minds are uplifted, and we have a sense of the meaning. So these are generally called the three bodies of the Buddha: the enlightened mind, and then the Nirmanakaya and Sambhogakaya. The long name one just means that they are inseparable. Svabhavakaya. The Svabhavakaya. It means that they cannot be separated. You can't break them apart. That's all it is. It's not a fourth body. It's not a fourth body. It's just the fact that they cannot be separated. So what Jamgon Khantrul is doing in this book is saying, he's using a really interesting comparison in this book. He's saying that mundane things, if they are seen properly, it's like seeing the Buddha. Yeah, because when we don't cling to things, when we don't cling to things, they don't disappear. They still appear, and yet we know they're empty. And this emptiness and appearance occur together, and they can't be separated. So Jamgon Khantrul is using this complicated example of the four bodies of the Buddha to say that when we properly experience appearances, they help us wake up. Did that help? So probably it's dedication of merit time. But before we do, I'd like for you to think that you are gathering together all of the merit that you have accumulated, not just in this session, but in your whole life, and that you will accumulate in the future, and dedicate it all to the benefit of suffering beings. And may they be free from their suffering. May they come to happiness, and then to Buddhahood. And having arrived at Buddhahood, may they emanate in all directions and benefit suffering beings endlessly. And so we'll dedicate our merit with this thought in mind.